So, here is the boy, drowning. In these last moments, it's not the water that's finally done for him, it's the cold. It's bled all the energy from his body and contracted his muscles into a painful uselessness, no matter how much he fights to keep himself above the surface. He's strong and young, nearly 17, but the wintry waves keep coming, each one seemingly larger than the last. They spin him round, topple him over, force him deeper down and down. Even when he can catch his breath in the few terrified seconds he manages to push his face into the air, he's shaking so badly he can barely get half a lungful before he's under again. It isn't enough. Grows less each time, and he feels a terrible yearning in his chest as he aches fruitlessly for more. He's in full panic now. He knows he's drifted just slightly too far from shore to make it back, the icy tide pulling him out farther and farther with every wave, pushing him towards the rocks that make this bit of coast so treacherous. He also knows there's no one who'll notice he's gone in time, no one who'll raise the alarm before the water defeats him. He won't be saved by chance either. There are no beachcombers or tourists to dive in from the shoreline to save him. Not this time of year, not in these freezing temperatures. It's too late for him. He will die, and he will die alone. The sudden gasping horror of knowing this makes him panic even more. He tries again to break the surface, not daring to think it might be his last time, not daring to think much at all. He forces his legs to kick, forces his arms to heave himself upward, to at least get his body the right way round, to try and grasp another breath just inches away. But the current is too strong. It allows him tantalizingly near the surface, but spins him upside down before he can get there, dragging him closer to the rocks. The waves toy with him as he tries again, and fails. Then, without warning, the game the sea seems to have been playing, the cruel game of keeping him just alive enough to think that he might make it, that game seems to be over. The current surges, slamming him into the killingly hard rocks. His right shoulder blade snaps in two so loudly he can hear the crack even underwater, even in this rush of tide. The mindless intensity of the pain is so great that he calls out, his mouth instantly filling with freezing, briny seawater. He coughs against it, but only drags more into his lungs. He curves into the pain of his shoulder, blinded by it, paralyzed by its intensity. He's unable to even try and swim now, unable to brace himself as the waves turn him over once more. Please, is all he thinks. Just the one word echoing through his head. Please. The current grips him a final time. It rears back as if to throw him, and it dashes him head first into the rocks. He slams into them with the full, furious weight of an angry ocean behind him. He's unable to even raise his hands to try and soften the blow. The impact is just behind his left ear. It fractures his skull, splintering it into his brain, the force of it also crushing his third and fourth vertebrae, severing both the cerebral artery and his spinal cord. An injury from which there is no return, no recovery, no chance. He dies. Chapter 1. The first moments after the boy's death pass for him in a confused and weighty blur. He's dimly aware of pain, but mostly of a tremendous fatigue, as if he's been covered in layer upon layer of impossibly heavy blankets. He struggles against them blindly, his thrashing increasing as he panics again at the invisible ropes that seem to bind him. His mind isn't clear. It races and throbs like the worst kind of fever, and he's unaware of even thinking. It's more some kind of wild, dying instinct, a terror of what's to come, a terror of what's happened, a terror of his death, as if he can still struggle against it, still outrun it. He even has a distant sensation of momentum, his body continuing its fight against the waves, even though that fight has already been lost. He feels a sudden rushing, a surge of terror hurtling him forward, 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 but he must be free of his body somehow, because his shoulder no longer hurts as he struggles blindly through the dark, unable to feel anything, it seems, except a terrified urgency to move. And then there's a coolness on his face. almost as of a breeze, though such a thing seems impossible for so many reasons. It's this coolness that causes his consciousness, his soul, his spirit, who's to say, to pause in its fevered spin. For an instant, he is still. There's a change in the murk before his eyes, a lightness he can enter somehow, and he can feel himself leaning towards it, his body so weak, so nearly incapable beneath him, reaching for the growing light. He falls onto solidity. The coolness rises from it, and he allows himself to sink into it, let it envelop him. He's still. He gives up his struggle. He lets oblivion overtake him. Oblivion is purgatorial and gray. He's passively conscious, not asleep, but not quite awake either, as if disconnected from everything, unable to move or think or receive input, able only to exist. An impossible amount of time passes, a day, a year, maybe even an eternity. There's no way he can know. Finally, in the distance, the light begins to slowly, almost imperceptibly change. A grayness emerges, then a lighter grayness, and he starts to come back to himself. His first thought, more vaguely sensed than actually articulated, is that it feels as though he's pressed against a cement block. He's dimly aware of how cool it is under him, how solid it feels, like he's clinging to it lest he fly off into space. He hovers around the thought for an indeterminate amount of time, letting it clarify, letting it connect to his body, to other thoughts. The word morgue suddenly flashes somewhere deep inside him, for where else are you laid out on cool, solid blocks? And in rising horror, he opens his eyes, unaware they were even closed. He tries to call out that they must not bury him, they must not cut him open, that there's been a terrible, terrible mistake. But his throat rebels against the formation of words as if it hasn't been used for years, and he's coughing and sitting up in terror, his eyes muddled and foggy, like he's looking at the world from behind many thick layers of dirty glass. He blinks repeatedly, trying to see. The vague shapes around him slowly fall into place. He sees that he is not on the cold slab of a morgue. He is... Where is he? Confused, he squints painfully into what now seems to be rising daylight. He looks around, trying to take it in, trying to see it, make sense of it all. He seems to be lying on a concrete path that runs through the front yard of a house, stretching from the sidewalk to a front door behind him. The house is not his own. And there's more wrong than just that. He breathes for a moment, heavily, almost panting, his mind groggy, his vision slowly becoming a little clearer. He feels himself shaking from the chill and pulls his arms around himself, sensing a dampness covering not his clothes. He looks down at them, his physical reaction slower than the thought that ordered it. He squints again, trying to see them clearly. They don't seem to really be clothes at all, just strips of white cloth that barely fit the name trousers or shirt, stuck closely around him more like bandages than things to wear. And all along one side, they're wet with... He stops. They're not wet with seawater, not with the soaking, briny cold of the ocean he was just drowning in. And only half of him is wet anyway. The other half, the half that was against the ground, is cool but quite dry. He looks around more confused than ever because he can only be wet with dew. The sun is low in the sky and it seems as if it must be morning. Underneath him he can even make out a dry outline of where he was lying, as if he had lain there all night. But that can't be. He remembers the brutal winter coldness of the water, the dark freezing gray of the sky overhead that would never let him survive a night out in it. But that isn't this sky. He lifts his face to it. This sky isn't even winter. The chill is merely the chill of morning, of possibly a warm day to come, of possibly a summer day. Nothing at all like the bitter wind of the beach. Nothing at all like when he died. He takes another moment to breathe, to just do that if he can. There's only quiet around him, only the sounds he himself is making. He turns slowly to look at the house again. It resolves itself more and more as his eyes get used to the light, used it almost seems to seeing again. And then, through the fog and confusion, he feels a soft tremor in his blanketed mind, a brush, a hint, a featherweight of, is it familiarity? I think that's enough. I think that's about all I can do. Yeah, that's good. Thank you very much. Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, that was already twice as long as the readings I normally do, and sort of half of what you guys expect. So
We still let stuff out, right?
yeah.
Thanks a lot, Patrick. So preceding the part that you just read for us, and this is like this little tradition for authors to put quotes in the front of their books.
Yeah. Bye.
And the first one...
Hope you enjoyed yourselves.
The first one that you put there is out of Amy Mann's song Borrowing Time.
Yep.
And it goes like that. You ask a question in the mirror, alas, no answer could be clearer. And in the story of in-between spaces, of the blurring of realities, what is it that, in fact, questions might tell us more than answers?
If you knew you had to leave early, why would you sit in the middle of a row? Just wondering. I'm sorry, what was the question? I totally wasn't paying attention. Something about the quote.
I think they're coming back, actually.
It's just about, that's fine. It's just about how you see yourself. You ask a question in the mirror, alas, no answer could be clearer. It's about how you look at yourself and only see one thing. Mm-hmm. When you are way more than one thing, when there are millions of parts to you, when there's always more to you. So that's what it's about, really. And that's what the whole book's about, really, to see that there is more than this, like the title.
Maybe we can make that a bit more concrete. There's Seth, we haven't heard his name so far in there. There were, I think, kind of 20 people who know the book. So maybe we can connect that a little bit to the character and what, without maybe mentioning too much.
Sure. Well, Seth dies, as you heard, and then he wakes up, as you heard. And that's all I'm willing to talk about it. And so the book becomes a question of, he wakes up in what turns out to be the neighborhood where he grew up, in England, rather than the neighborhood where he drowned, which is in America. And so, and the neighborhood that he wakes up in is abandoned. It's empty. The whole planet seems empty. There are no people. Nobody's driving any cars. There are no planes in the sky. The ground is covered in sort of mud and dust. The cars have, all the wheels are flat. The world is decaying. Plants are overgrowing everywhere. And he's alone in his old neighborhood. So the first part of the book is asking the question, where is he? And the second part of the book answers the question. It says, here is the young adult adventure answer to the question, where is he? What world is this? And the third part of the book says, are you sure? Are you absolutely sure that the answers you've been given are true? And does it matter? And how much does it matter? And so it's kind of philosophical, and it's kind of, it's a bit of a mindfuck. Look that up, that's good slang too. And that's what I kind of wanted. Hopefully you never quite are sure where you are. You're never quite sure what exactly is happening. So that's what it's about.
So when it comes to the second quote by Peter Gabriel, this is about future and past. And more than this is, in fact, dealing much with the question of what's next. Now what connects these two, in my eyes, is memories and how they shape ourselves. And I find that quite a compelling topic of the whole book, but talking about you as a 40-year-old writing for young people.
Saying my age.
You did it before.
Yes, I think less memory than point of view. I've always said that the blessing and the curse of being young, of being your age, and I know that's such a patronizing thing to say, and I apologize for it, but the blessing and the curse of being young is that how you feel can take up everything. So if you feel great, you feel fantastic. And the world is always going to be this great. The world is always going to be this brilliant. And it's always going to be summer, and it's always going to be fantastic, and you're always going to be in love, and it's always going to feel this fresh, which is great. But when you feel bad, when you feel despairing, when something goes wrong, that feels like it's going to last forever. It feels like there's no other feeling in the world than that. And that's a challenge. And I think that that's a real thing. I don't think that's you get a lot of, well, you're young, you'll grow out of it. Well, who cares? Who cares if you'll grow out of it? You're feeling it now, and that's important, and now is what's important. So it's about that. It's about seeing that, yeah, the pain is real, and it does take up space, and it is something true and legitimate and needs to be addressed, but it's not everything. That's what, to me, it's about. That this is all true, but there is more. There's more that might explain it. There's a point of view that might help you live with it. So that's what it is. It's just about always demanding more, always demanding, when things are rough, always demanding a further explanation.
And this is my last question, then it's your turn. I read your story also as a powerful statement for young people that there is more than a world of, let's say, maybe prejudice or dictate how anybody should live their lives. And in fact, I think the very beginnings of fantasy fiction, also maybe zombie Frankenstein literature, were all connected to a kind of critique of rational logic, of the logic of what's happening around us, the logic of forces.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
right?
God, no book,
And,
yeah.
But I think that's something really we can really all feel here. The logic. Do you want to read my question?
Look at how long this question is.
I can shorten it maybe.
That's fine.
So I mean, because this is about more than this. But how do we find, like, what's the key about this? Like when you wrote the book, what might be the key of finding more than this in these situations that force us to be somebody conformed? You know.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I would never want to write a book that preached. I'd never want to write a book that told you a lesson of how you need to act, because who wants to read that? I don't want to read that. I think every good book, hopefully every good book, isn't about the future, and it isn't about zombies. It's about right now, and it's about the world as it is right now, just seen in a different way. So I don't know, I think a point of a book is to ask questions rather than to answer them. And so I think this is just asking questions. And also I think it's presenting, I just try, like, part of what I answered earlier, you write a book about the world as you want it, or as it should be, and you don't make a big deal of that. And that changes the world a little bit. So partially it's that. There's three main characters in it, and they're all different, and they're all from different places with different life experiences, like the first question was. Because that's how I think the world actually is. And they end up working together, not in some let's all get together in harmony and sing in a choir and everything's wonderful and it's, that's a load of nonsense, but it's they figure it out anyway. So that's what I think it's about. I would just read it.